Welcome to Paranormal Files. Each week, we dive into the mysteries of ghosts, UFOs, cryptids, and everything in between. Join us on a journey into the unknown. Let's dive in. Vampires, ancient symbols of fear and fascination, have existed in various forms across cultures for centuries. One of the earliest recorded vampire-like beings emerged in ancient Mesopotamia. Known as the Akimu, this spirit was believed to be a restless soul unable to pass into the afterlife, forced to feed on the life forces of the living. Ancient Greece also had its own versions of vampires, like the Lamia and Strigas, which were said to drain the blood of their victims. These early tales shared common traits that would later appear in modern vampire lore. Undead beings that prey upon the living, often motivated by some form of curse, unfinished business, or deep hunger for human blood or energy. These ancient accounts set the foundation for the vampire as a figure that straddles life and death, making them unsettling and mysterious from the outset. In the Middle Ages, vampire myths flourished, particularly in Eastern Europe, where the folklore of the Slavic and Balkan regions introduced some of the most well-known elements of vampire lore. Here, vampires were often described as revenants, dead individuals who returned from the grave to attack family members or communities. The fear of vampires during this period was so pronounced that villagers would often exhume corpses thought to be vampires. If the body appeared unusually preserved, it would be subjected to rituals such as a stake through the heart, decapitation, or burning. One infamous case involved Peter Plogowitz, a Serbian farmer whose supposed return from the dead to feed on villagers sparked widespread fear. These medieval beliefs in vampires reflected not only a deep-seated fear of death, but also anxiety about disease and the supernatural forces that could impact communities. In societies where knowledge of decomposition and infectious diseases was limited, the appearance of a well-preserved corpse could easily be mistaken for something sinister, reinforcing the belief that the dead could indeed walk among the living. The 18th century marked a critical period for the vampire legend as vampire hysteria swept across Europe. During this time, reports of vampire activity surged, with prominent cases in Hungary, Austria, and Prussia. One of the most famous incidents was that of Arnold Payol, a Serbian soldier who, after his death, was believed to have become a vampire. Villagers reported Payole had attacked several people, and when his body was exhumed, it was described as showing little sign of decay. The military got involved, exhuming suspected vampires and recording detailed accounts that spread the lore across Europe. The surge in vampire cases prompted formal studies and official documents, effectively solidifying the vampire figure in European culture. These cases and the panic they generated led many scholars to examine the social and psychological roots of vampire legends. In societies where harsh living conditions and disease were constant threats, it's easy to see why these tales found fertile ground. Fear of contagion, the unknown, and spirits returning to enact revenge all fueled vampire folklore. Vampires entered the literary world in the 19th century, starting with John Polidori's The Vampire in 1819, which introduced the aristocratic vampire Lord Ruthven. This character, cold and calculating, marked a shift in vampire imagery, transforming vampires from monstrous undead to alluring yet deadly predators. However, it was Bram Stoker's Dracula, published in 1897, that cemented the vampire archetype in Western culture. Stoker's Dracula was a nobleman from Transylvania, a land already rich in vampire folklore, who could shapeshift, mesmerize, and feed on the blood of his victims to sustain his own immortality. Dracula not only intensified Western fascination with vampires, but also introduced the idea of the vampire as a blend of horror and seduction, driven by a mix of bloodlust and charm. The novel tapped into Victorian fears about sexuality, immigration, and disease, elevating the vampire myth to a broader cultural symbol. Dracula's influence persists to this day, shaping countless adaptations and ensuring the vampire's continued hold on the imagination. As vampires gained popularity in literature, they also began to evolve in folklore beyond Europe. In China, for instance, there are tales of the jiangshi, sometimes known as hopping vampires, corpses reanimated by souls unable to rest peacefully. These beings were thought to hop toward their victims, as rigor mortis restricted their movement. The jiangshi drains life energy, or qi, from the living, reflecting a belief in spiritual energy rather than the blood-focused nature of European vampires. In the Philippines, the aswang is a shape-shifting creature that preys on humans, often feeding on unborn children and infants. It has both vampiric and witch-like qualities, representing a unique interpretation of the vampire archetype within Southeast Asian folklore. These vampire legends in Asia differ from Western portrayals, yet they reveal a universal human fear of death and the unknown, highlighting our enduring fascination with beings that can transcend mortality. Modern vampire mythology owes much to cinema and television, where vampires continue to evolve and captivate audiences. Early films like Nosferatu, 1922, brought Dracula's legacy to the screen, presenting the vampire as a sinister, rat-like figure. However, it was Bela Lugosi's performance in Dracula, 1931, that popularized the vampire's iconic characteristics: the aristocratic demeanor, the slicked-back hair, and the accent, giving the vampire an allure and sophistication. Later adaptations in the 20th and 21st centuries shifted the vampire's image further. Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles introduced vampires who grappled with existential dread and ethical dilemmas. In Interview with the Vampire, Rice's characters Louis and Lestat contemplate immortality's burdens and loneliness, marking a turn toward a more introspective, morally conflicted vampire. By the time Twilight and True Blood arrived, vampires had become symbols of rebellion, otherness, and forbidden romance, signifying a complete transformation from the mindless predators of earlier centuries to complex, even sympathetic figures. Vampires continue to be powerful symbols in modern culture, embodying themes of mortality, desire, and the tension between human and beast. They blur the boundaries between life and death, self-control and surrender, civilization and savagery. The vampire's persistence in folklore and popular media reflects a fascination with these contradictions, exploring what it means to be both predator and lover, cursed and immortal. They hold a mirror to humanity's own desires and fears, making them endlessly adaptable across eras and cultures. Even with countless adaptations and interpretations, vampires retain their allure as both terrifying and attractive, reminding us of our fascination with the unknown and our fear of what might be lurking just beyond the realm of life. In recent decades, vampires have grown even more complex, adapting to new cultural shifts while staying rooted in their original mystique. Much of this evolution can be attributed to the vampire's role in literature, film, and television, where they've become a way to explore deeper themes related to identity, power, and the human psyche. Unlike their brutal predecessors, modern vampires often face existential crises, self-doubt, and a profound sense of alienation. This shift began with Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles, where vampires like Louis and Lestat grapple with questions about morality, immortality, and what it means to retain humanity despite monstrous appetites. Here, the vampire becomes a metaphor for inner turmoil and the search for meaning in a world of darkness. Rice's vampires are no longer mere symbols of horror, but are thoughtful beings, challenging readers to consider the moral weight of eternal life and the consequences of consuming others for survival. The expansion of vampire lore continued with television series like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, which introduced vampires with layers of moral ambiguity and individuality. Characters like Angel and Spike were vampires with pasts that informed their present actions, and they wrestled with personal redemption, love, and betrayal. These shows took the vampire genre to new heights by blending the supernatural with themes of adolescence, romance, and self-discovery, appealing to audiences beyond horror enthusiasts. In Buffy, vampires became a symbol of personal and social challenges faced by young adults, reinforcing the vampire's versatility in representing both literal and metaphorical monsters. Spike, a vampire who evolves from villain to love interest, embodies the trope of the redeemable monster, which became a popular concept in the genre. Through these stories, vampires reflect modern anxieties, becoming vessels for themes of identity crisis and transformation in a rapidly changing world. In the early 2000s, vampires were reimagined once more with Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series, which presented them as brooding, misunderstood figures who could choose not to harm humans. Edward Cullen, the protagonist vampire, represents a new archetype, one who abstains from his darker impulses for the sake of love and moral integrity. The Cullens, as a vegetarian vampire family, introduced the idea of vampires choosing a path of restraint, controlling their primal urges to live peacefully among humans. Twilight helped cement the image of vampires as conflicted beings, navigating the fine line between predator and protector, giving audiences a romanticized version of the vampire that aligns with themes of control, forbidden love, and sacrifice. This romanticization of vampires appealed particularly to young adult audiences, making vampires a symbol of the mysterious, irresistible other, rather than purely a creature of horror. Around the same time, shows like True Blood and The Vampire Diaries brought vampires into the mainstream with a grittier edge, emphasizing their role in exploring issues of power, addiction, and secrecy. In True Blood, vampires come out of the coffin, attempting to live openly among humans, which introduces themes of acceptance, prejudice, and identity politics. Here, vampires struggle with integration and the desire to maintain their own culture while adapting to human society. These shows continue to depict vampires as beings caught between worlds, haunted by their pasts, yet yearning for acceptance. As supernatural beings who live with secrecy and suppression, vampires in True Blood reflect a society's battle with embracing diversity while confronting age-old fears. Through these narratives, vampires become complex characters who mirror real societal challenges, adding layers to their existence beyond simple predation. The evolution of vampire storytelling reflects a shift in society's relationship with fear and the unknown. Rather than seeing vampires purely as external threats, modern interpretations delve into their humanity, exploring how they handle timeless struggles, moral dilemmas, isolation, and self-control. This shift from monster to misunderstood outsider underscores the role vampires play in reflecting society's shifting concerns and curiosities. In today's culture, vampires resonate with individuals who feel marginalized or struggle with identity, making them not only icons of horror, but also of personal strength and resilience. With each new interpretation, vampires reveal more about human nature, embodying the idea that monsters are not so different from ourselves, and often the real battle lies within. As vampire lore continues to evolve, these creatures adapt to the fears and desires of the age, embodying the complexity of human experience. Whether as symbols of forbidden love, power struggles, or the quest for redemption, vampires persist because they speak to the depths of human psychology and the ongoing fascination with life's darkest questions. Their transformation from terrifying revenants to complex, sympathetic figures reflects a culture that no longer fears the unknown in the same way, but seeks to understand and even embrace it. Vampires now serve as powerful symbols for issues such as self-acceptance, moral restraint, and the navigation of dual identities, proving that this age-old legend will continue to be a compelling lens through which we explore ourselves. Another fascinating aspect of vampire lore lies in the historical figures and events that have inspired vampire mythology. One of the most prominent examples is Vlad the Impaler, also known as Vlad Dracula, a 15th century Wallachian prince who ruled in what is now Romania. Known for his brutal and violent methods in warfare, Vlad earned a reputation for impaling his enemies on stakes, an act that would leave his territory littered with bodies as a warning to invaders. His nickname, Dracula, derived from the Romanian Dracul, meaning dragon or devil, added a dark, fearsome element to his identity. Bram Stoker's Dracula drew on aspects of Vlad's character, intertwining his cruel legacy with the supernatural to create a lasting horror icon. This association between Vlad and the vampire myth has only intensified over the years, giving the vampire archetype a dark historical foundation. Moving further into history, another figure often connected with vampire lore is the Hungarian Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Bathory, a 16th century noblewoman, was infamous for her alleged acts of cruelty against young servant girls in her household. Rumors suggest that she believed bathing in the blood of virgins would keep her youthful. Though these tales are likely exaggerated or fabricated, Bathory's story has become a cornerstone of vampire mythology, reflecting society's long-standing fear of power wielded without mercy and the obsession with eternal youth. Her life and legends have woven their way into vampire lore as an example of bloodlust and immortality, further reinforcing the idea of vampires as dangerous figures who prey on the vulnerable for personal gain. Legends and stories of vampires also exist outside of Europe, with diverse cultures contributing to the mythos in unique ways. In ancient Mesopotamia, for example, there were tales of a demonic entity named Lilitu, later evolving into Lilith in Jewish mythology, who was said to prey on newborns and pregnant women. Lilith has often been connected to vampiric qualities, particularly through her association with night and blood, embodying the darker aspects of femininity and independence. Similarly, in China, there is the jiangshi, a reanimated corpse that drains life force from its victims. The jiangshi lore, distinct from European vampires in origin, represents the concept of a spirit that must feed off the living to sustain its unnatural life, blending elements of the vampire archetype with unique cultural beliefs about death and the afterlife. Another example is the aswang, a supernatural creature from Filipino folklore that takes different forms depending on the region. Sometimes depicted as a beautiful woman by day who transforms into a ghoul at night, the aswang has traits similar to vampires and is feared for its ability to steal blood and prey on the vulnerable. These global variations highlight how universal the themes of fear, bloodlust, and immortality are, and how the vampire archetype resonates across different cultures despite varied interpretations. In the Americas, the legend of El Chupacabra, while often categorized separately from traditional vampire lore, also shares elements with vampire myths. Known for its alleged attacks on livestock and its reputation for drinking the blood of animals, El Chupacabra has fueled vampire-like fear among communities, creating a modern iteration of blood-drinking folklore in Latin America. Although the Chupacabra may not fit the classic vampire mold, the themes of predation and bloodshed link it conceptually to vampire legends, demonstrating how the core characteristics of vampires continue to evolve across different cultural contexts. These cross-cultural connections underscore that the vampire mythos is not confined to one region or historical period. Instead, it speaks to deeply rooted human fears of death, the unknown, and the violation of bodily sanctity. Whether through Vlad Dracula, Elizabeth Bathory, or regional variations like the aswang and jiangshi, the figure of the vampire has become a mirror, reflecting humanity's fears and fascinations across the ages. It is a testament to the universality of the vampire archetype that, despite these geographic and cultural differences, the myth endures as a powerful symbol in the collective human psyche. One intriguing aspect of vampire lore is the extensive array of methods people have used to protect themselves from these creatures. These practices vary widely across cultures and time periods, and while they might seem strange or even extreme today, they reflect the intense fear that once surrounded the vampire myth. Garlic, perhaps one of the most iconic vampire repellents, has roots in ancient beliefs about its protective and purifying qualities. In European folklore, it was believed that garlic could ward off evil spirits and purify environments. Its pungent odor was thought to repel not only vampires, but also other malevolent forces, creating a barrier against the undead. Holy symbols, such as crosses and crucifixes, have also been central to vampire folklore, especially in the Western world. This association can be traced to the religious context of many European vampire myths, where vampires were often seen as creatures that defied the laws of God and the natural order. By wielding symbols of faith, such as crucifixes or holy water, people believed they could defend themselves against these demonic entities. In some cultures, holy symbols or phrases were engraved or placed near burial sites to ensure that the dead would stay at rest and not return as vampires. Iron and silver have long been regarded as powerful tools in the fight against vampires. These metals were thought to have purifying properties, with iron being particularly common in folklore as a way to protect against various supernatural entities, including vampires, fairies, and other mythical creatures. Silver, often considered a symbol of purity and incorruptibility, was believed to have the power to harm or repel vampires. This belief has persisted in popular culture, where silver is still considered effective against supernatural beings, notably werewolves and, occasionally, vampires. In Slavic regions, preventing the dead from rising as vampires led to some particularly macabre practices. The dead would sometimes be buried with their mouths filled with bricks, stones, or coins to prevent them from biting or rising from the grave. In Romania, there were cases where stakes were driven through the heart of suspected vampires, pinning them to their graves to ensure they could not escape. The use of wooden stakes, especially crafted from specific types of wood like hawthorn or ash, became a significant part of vampire lore. The idea was that piercing a vampire's heart would destroy its unholy life force, rendering it powerless. In addition to physical measures, spiritual rituals were also widely practiced to protect communities from vampires. Some Slavic and Balkan cultures would engage in elaborate exorcism rites, and in certain cases, family members would rebury the deceased with specific rites designed to prevent the rise of a vampire. Legends suggest that in areas plagued by supposed vampire sightings, communities would sometimes go as far as exhuming bodies to check for signs of vampirism. If a corpse was found with unusually fresh skin or blood in its mouth, signs thought to indicate vampirism, it would be subjected to additional rituals, such as burning or decapitation, to eliminate the threat. These protective measures, as intense as they were, highlight the historical fear of vampires and the lengths to which people would go to safeguard themselves and their communities. The detailed rituals and beliefs surrounding vampire prevention reveal how deeply embedded the vampire myth was in cultural consciousness. They reflect a time when supernatural beliefs held strong sway, and when the vampire archetype, with its connections to death, decay, and predation, symbolized a profound and ever-present threat. The enduring legacy of these protective rituals has contributed to the vampire legend's lasting impact on culture, influencing everything from horror literature to modern depictions of these creatures in films and media. Thanks for listening to Paranormal Files. I'm your host, Zoe Parker. If you liked this episode, don't forget to follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Share this episode with your fellow paranormal enthusiasts, and be sure to connect with us on social media for behind-the-scenes content and exclusive updates. Join us next time for another exciting journey into the world of the paranormal. If you enjoyed this episode and want to dive even deeper into the world of the paranormal, consider subscribing for exclusive access to content you won't find anywhere else. As a subscriber, you'll get unreleased episodes too shocking or controversial for mainstream platforms, members-only bonus episodes, not available anywhere else, extended director's cut versions of your favorite paranormal investigations, early access to new episodes before they're released to the public, and much more. Thank you for your support. The link is in the description below. Join now.